was going to say she's having her
Thursday.
Thursday. Yep, she's having a valve replacement.
I don't know the name, but it's my son's girlfriend's mother has cancer and she has weeks to live.
Oh, that's so tough.
She's in Japan.
Okay. Are they going back to see her then, I assume?
She can't get up.
She can't get up. She's in school. She's a professor at Bloomsburg.
And they won't let her out?
Let her out.
Oh my goodness, to see your dying parent?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
that's what I said too.
I'd leave.
No joke. Oh my goodness, that's horrible. Okay.
And I like her to have more confidence in my walking.
Okay. Sounds good. We'll do that. It's hard when you've taken a spill. Yeah, definitely. Okay, let's do that. Lord, we thank you for the chance to be together around your word this day. We ask for your blessing upon us, that you may guide us in a right understanding of it. Bless also be with the people we have named this day, for the Heinleys, I guess, daughter-in-law's mother, that she would find comfort and know of your eternal love as her earthly life ends. Bless and be with Joanne as she gets ready to have this valve replacement. I know she's quite nervous about it, Lord, but she also has the reassurance that she's got the best doctor in the valley for that, and that it's a routine procedure for him. But grant her confidence and strength as she goes through it. And bless and be with Vanetta as she recovers from her recent spill, that she can gain confidence again and not be so nervous, knowing that she's getting stronger every day. All these things and whatever else is needed, Lord, we lift to you this morning in the precious name of our Savior Jesus. Amen. All right.
The problem is with our son's friend. She's the Japanese girl. They don't have religion.
Well, they do it. It's a strange thing that my kids, because they're really into Japanese culture, there's a saying in Japan, what is it? You're born Shinto, you marry Christian, and you die Buddhist. So it's a strange culture where there's a lot of what we would call syncretism going on. I don't know if you know that word. It's a good word to know, especially in this day and age. And I think because the internet has made the world so small, we're going to see a lot of it. Syncretism means blending of religions together, often incompatible religions. And it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting phrase for Christians, because it's something the church has both fought against and worked with. And here's why. Christianity and Judaism before it does not confess that every other religion is completely wrong. It confesses that they have the most important things wrong. Or that rather, better way to say it, we have the most important things right. We know who God is. I'm not going to remember the name of the fallacy. I used to know the Latin for all the fallacies, and it's gone from my brain. But it's the fallacy of saying because somebody does it, that means it's right or wrong. So you say your syllogism would work like this: Nazis were bad people. Nazis tucked their children into bed at night. Therefore, tucking your children into bed at night is wrong. Okay. Christianity and Judaism before it never approached other religions in that way. Okay. And it's really rooted in the Psalms. I think it's Psalm 139 where it confesses that God never leaves himself without a witness. If I go to the top of the mountains, you're there. If I go to the deepest depth, you're there. There's no place that God is not. And so consequently, there's no place that the Spirit has left completely abandoned, even if they've really gone far down this track of the Nephilim and all the stuff we're talking about as we're in Genesis chapter 6. There are still good things there. And so when Christians, especially during our great period of evangelism, and I don't mean the 16th century, when there was this colonialism that modern people react so much to. I'm talking about the period of the first 3 centuries when we were oppressed, but Christianity still spread like a weed. Like the harder they tried to stomp it out, the more it got there. Christians would start by interacting with the good things in the culture, not the bad things. It wasn't the turn and burn classic, turn or burn classic, evangelical sermon from the South. It was, I see more like Paul at Mars Hill, right in Athens. So he goes out there and says, "I see that you're wonderfully pious people." He starts with what they have in common, and then goes, "Here's it. The where you're off comes after the good news about what I've come to bring, and that does mean incompatibility with some of the things you've seen before, right? Or some of the things you practiced before. For instance, for some of the Canaanites, like the Amorites, it would mean no more human sacrifice. Okay, that would go with it. But they don't start by saying no human sacrifice. They start by saying, here is the God who you either do not know or have forgotten. And you build from there. I see at least you believe in God or in the gods. So we're going to start from there and build, okay? So the reason syncretism is dangerous because you can blend in incompatible things. But whether it be Greek philosophy or the best aspects of another religion, Christians would embrace those things and Jews could too in a conversation, and even you can see things lifted up out of your own tradition that you've kind of gotten obscured or forgot about, right? So if you understand Buddhism, Buddhism's not really a religion. It's more of a psychological system, right? Well, there have been a number of books written about Jesus as the Buddha because Jesus is a brilliant psychologist. And what these people are looking at is the overlap between Buddhist beliefs and the way that Jesus functions. Like, for instance, some of the things that Jesus will say are a lot like I'm not going to spell the word right if I put it up there, so I'm not going to do it. But in Buddhism, there's a thing called a koan. And what it is it's a statement that the teacher uses to break down the preconceptions of the student. So, for instance, if a tree falls in the woods and no one is there to hear it, doesn't make a sound. Think about that for a while. So you stop that. Well, Jesus will ask questions like that too. In fact, I kind of felt like this past Sunday when he's talking to Nicodemus, it's like that. Nicodemus comes to him and asks one question, and Jesus answers about something completely different. Like he's trying to break down this Pharisee's preconceptions, and maybe even break down the fact that Nicodemus is a teacher of the law, right? Maybe he needs to learn that he's not a teacher but a student when he comes to Jesus, and Jesus breaking down his preconceptions does. So there's Jesus acting in a way that would be completely understandable to a Buddhist monk. Okay, so now the syncretism, the danger is that we can bring in things that don't belong and are incompatible with the fundamentals of the Christian revelation. And it is revelation, right? So that's the biggest thing. So Christians have both interacted with the cultures and learned from them, so we can adopt the best of philosophy and things like that, because all truth belongs to God. But you have to be evaluating it and going, but that part doesn't work, or that part doesn't work. And so there's this kind of push and pull throughout Christian history as the church gets influenced by the culture, because it's intentionally engaging the culture. It gets over-influenced by the culture and loses important things, and then it has to course correct and come back. So you see this kind of constant swing throughout church history as it engages culture and other thought systems and stuff like this. So syncretism is in our day and age because all of a sudden people are talking to each other who never did and who don't have enough training to evaluate. And I would include most of my classmates at seminary. My seminary education was abysmal. Not because I didn't have decent teachers in terms of them as moral people or nice people or whatever, but first of all, they were so highly specialized. Second of all, the pool of candidates for ministry is way different than it was 30 years ago. Most of my classmates were returning in from another field. They were coming as returning adult students, which gives you some life experience, and that's good. But 30 years before that, most students came in with what they called the pipeline, meaning as an undergraduate, you would either had philosophy or you'd had pre-seminary. So you had already had 4 years of Greek and Latin and Hebrew, and you'd had your understanding of philosophical systems and stuff like this. If you're coming in from the HR department at a big company to become a pastor, you don't have any of that background. So they can't start at the same place and get you educated. So as an example, I was asked to speak at a youth event maybe 15 years ago. And I was talking to one of the pastors at the side after I'd been up on the stage, and we were just a brief talk about Trinitarian theology. And he says, well, I think the Hindus have it right. I mean, God appears in lots and lots of different ways. We just know we know the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Well, that is 100% out of step with the rudiments of even not just Trinitarian theology, basic Jewish theology, let alone Christian theology that builds on top of that. I mean, he was just 100% out of step with it. But I think the Hindus, I mean, it seems kind of like we've got 3 gods, they've got 1,000. It's not all that different. It's not good thinking in any way, shape, or form. But here was a guy pastoring a church who thought this way. So the negative sides of syncretism, I think we're likely to see in the short term, because this technology is so new that has interconnected the world, that my kids can get online and chat with kids in Saudi Arabia and Japan and Africa now on lunch break. And that's just not something they would have been able to do at another point in time. And even if you had a pen pal overseas like I did in high school, we would exchange a letter, and then you have weeks to process things in it that you didn't understand, and maybe have conversations with people around you who maybe knew. My friend was from Spain, knew the culture in Spain that I didn't stuff. And Spain's even only one step away from us as a Western culture. An African culture or a Japanese culture, and it's some subcontinental India, all that's going to be so different, so radically different, that we're going to see a lot of loss in the short term. And that it'll be from like my grandkids and great-grandkids' generation to course correct, because things are going to get off base. In the meantime, we all do what we can to learn the heart of it and speak and teach according to the truth, and live according to the truth, right? So anyway, so I think that's something we're going to be facing in the short term here. And it's what we see the Israelites deal with over and over again, right? They're getting influenced by these other cultures. The Haram warfare that we talked about 2 weeks ago, where there were different rules of engagement for the giant clans than there were for all the other groups around them, was meant because their errors were so horrible, they were called abominations in God's sight, and bringing them into the life of the people of Israel would destroy their life. They couldn't afford to engage with these cultures. They needed to be destroyed. And of course, they didn't destroy them. That's the part of the story of the city of Joshua. They didn't actually wipe the cultures out. And I say wipe out, I'm not talking about killing everybody, making it so the culture doesn't function anymore. Okay? They didn't do that, and so they were influenced by it, and that leads to most of the Old Testament, right, where the prophets keep showing up and saying, oh, you're doing this horrible stuff again. Well, it's because they're being influenced by the giant clans and their religious practices. So, all right. So, back to chapter 6. We really haven't gone past the first 4 verses, so I'm going to start us at verse 5. We did read this, but this is going to launch us into the Noah story. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens, for I am sorry that I have made them. But Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So before we launch into the Noah story, what grabs your attention here?
It's hard for me to understand. God says that he's surprised by the evil of man, and yet God knows everything. He knew this was going to happen, so it's just hard to put it together.
Well, it doesn't say that God was surprised. It says that God saw, that God observed. It doesn't say he's surprised by it.
Okay, I guess you're right about that, yeah.
Yeah, so it's saying that God is observing the way this is unfolding. And again, like we've talked about this before, whenever we write to the this language of God wants to theomorphize us, but we tend to anthropomorphize God. Any of our language that we use like this to tell a story about God is necessarily limited. So we use the word saw because we as human beings have an experience of seeing, right? Mine's is getting worse. So right now you're all just a little blurry so that I can read my Bible. Now you're clear. So we use that language as an analogy for telling this story. But the way God sees is completely different than the way we see, right? But what happens for me is that when I see something, it means it comes into my awareness that way, right? It's something I wasn't aware of. I suddenly observe and I'm part of. Now, God certainly knows this is going to come, but he's observing. He's noticing. He's paying attention to what's happening. Even though they're outside of Eden, right? I mean, they're away from God's presence in a certain sense, even though God is everywhere, right? So there's a way in which they're away from God's presence. So this is basically a way of communicating that although we're away from God's presence, he is not away from ours. He still notices. He's still in charge. Okay. What else grabs your attention?
I'm surprised he includes the animals in this.
Ah, yes. I was wondering if anybody would bring that up. Yeah, why include the animals?
I don't know.
Did you ever watch a bird feeder?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
The animals can be pretty brutal, too. Yeah, there is a certain, death has entered the world. Yeah. This is something that we need to go back to Genesis 1 to really understand, and Genesis 2. Obviously, they're complementary stories. But Adam is not just created as the image of God, although he is that, right? He's the caretaker, or better word to say, he's the priest. His job is to mediate the presence of God to God's creation, right? And so it's interesting. God creates the animals, but allows Adam to name them, right? It's like a delegated kind of job. So basically what happens to us as human beings happens to the world, happens to the creation as well. Anything that happens to us flows out. So the curse that's placed upon, remember the in chapter 3, it's cursed is the ground because of you. Because of you, the ground is cursed, or another way of saying it. So this is an important place that we can connect with people outside the church at this day and age. We've got this massive environmental consciousness, and everybody's aware of how negatively we can impact the world. Christians and Jews have known that for 3,500 years or better. That what's happening inside us, but this is where the disconnect is. The world thinks that we made the mess, we can clean it up. We think we are the mess. And that's why we keep having the negative impact on the world that we do. We are the mess. God needs to clean us up. And so Romans 8 is going to talk about how all creation is groaning as though it's in labor pains. It's ready to give birth. What's it going to give birth to? The new creation, but it's waiting for our adoption, meaning the adoption of our bodies, what we call the resurrection of the dead in the creeds. It's waiting for that to happen before creation can be renewed. We need to be renewed. We are the conduit for the spiritual regeneration of the world, and unfortunately, the conduit for its fall and destruction. So the church fathers did not blush to say things like, "Why are there hurricanes? Why are there monsoons, and why are we lose people at sea? Because we sinned." There is no such thing as a natural disaster that we're not entitled. All the natural disasters are our fault too, because sin and death is operating in the world. There are forces opposed to God. Now, there's two different ways to look at this, and I think one of the contributions that J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis made um, is a very distinctively Christian way of looking to saying it's not so much death as the enemy per se. In Tolkien and Lewis, death can both be, it can be a good thing, but it's death is the problem when we're apart from God, when we're in our sin. So in the first of his space trilogy, a human being ends up going to a planet where where Adam and Eve didn't screw things up. So you end up in a world where where there's no sin operating. There is death, though. You see them fighting against, these other creatures and stuff like this, but they do so joyful with no fear because, there could be heroism, but there's not the downside. I might die here, but what does that matter? I already have this living connection with God, right? It's the disconnect with God. It's the impairment of our relationship with God that makes death a problem for us. Now, that's kind of unique to their things, but there are other theologians who have approached that in a more academic way. But yes, the animals are included in this because what happens to us happens to them. And in fact, it's not just going to happen to the animals; it's going to happen to the whole creation, right? Remember where we started? Where does Genesis 1 open up?
Creatures in the water.
It's not even creatures yet, right? It's just the Spirit of God moving over the face of the waters. And as we talked about, water represents chaos. So the flood story is a return of the chaos. It's a removal of the order into which God set the world. What else grabs you about these sentences?
He regrets he ever made us.
Yes. So again, whenever emotions are ascribed to God, we want to remember they're not exactly the emotions we have as human beings. So it's not like, and this is not a new idea. This is not modern theologians putting a spin on an old thing. If you look at the ancient Mishnahs and everything else, they understood this about these stories. They were very sophisticated story readers, in some ways more sophisticated than we are today, because it's what they had were stories, and they had lots of time to think about them. We rush from thing to thing to thing. When you have emotions here, we see a couple of emotions here, or human-like attributes ascribed to God. So God sees, right? God sees things. He regrets. What else does he do? Favor. Where's that?
With Noah.
Yes, thank you. Yep. Yeah, he favors Noah, or Noah finds favor in his eyes, right? He favors. Anything else?
All he loves.
He loves. Exactly. He grieves, right? At least mine in verse 6 says, it grieved him to his heart. The Lord regretted that he saw a head man on the face of the earth. It grieved him to his heart. So you see these, he has sorrow. I guess it's the same way it says he's sorry. I didn't think about this till just now, but, sorrow in verb form is sorry, right? So, yeah, he sees, regrets, favors, loves, grieves. The way for us to understand these kind of emotions when they're ascribed to God is that our human version of these is like a shadow of God's. Okay, so if we think we've felt grief, it ain't nothing compared to what God's felt. We're made in God's image, not the other way around. So when we regret something we've done, the worst thing we've ever done, right? So one of the shows I'm watching right now, it's set in ancient times. You don't have much medical technology, and a child is dying, he's breech, unable to be born, and so they deliver him by cesarean section, but of course that makes the mother bleed out and she dies. So, and in the end, the child dies anyway. So the husband who had to make the decision whether to have his wife have the cesarean section has this double regret now, okay? That's nothing compared to God's regret. There's a wonderful phrase in Rob Roy that sticks in my mind, where the wife of Rob Roy says my love for my husband is but a moon cast shadow of my love for his pride, because she loves that he's a proud man even though he's a farmer. She says my love for his pride is nothing but a moon cast shadow to my love for him. So if you think about a shadow cast by the moon, how wavy and ugly it, or unformed it is, but it has to be cast by a real object. Our emotions are a shadow of God's emotions. What we call regret is nothing compared to God's regret. What we call seeing is nothing compared to God's seeing. What we call favor is nothing compared to God's favor. I may favor one or more of my students in my creative writing class because they put in more effort, but it's nothing compared to the favor God shows, So really important for us to remember that this language points us in the right direction. It points us in the direction of a truth, but we can't get all the way there because we don't understand exactly the intensity, the capacity, the simple size of what it is to be God is beyond us. Okay. So we're going to have kids walking by today because they're arriving late. They're on a 2-hour delay because there was more ice in the Poconos than there was down here. So, all right. Anything else here?
Noah found favor. So Noah was a very righteous man?
We're going to find out. But yeah, that's at least the implication, is that all the stuff that we have described and that I gave you well, it's not really described. I gave you the background of what the first 4 verses of chapter 6 are referring to, right? Noah's not participating in that stuff. And that's significant, right? If you look back at his lineage, because you have the lineage of Seth contrasted with the lineage of Cain, right? And in Noah's background, we do at least have Enoch, who we were told walked with God so well that he was taken up, right? So Noah is apparently part of Seth's tradition, at least, doesn't participate in all this stuff and is righteous and walks with God still. So that's the implication here, because we're coming out of that long genealogy in Genesis 5. We have this little what's the word I'm looking for? Interruption of the first 4 verses of chapter 6 to explain what's going wrong, because now the Noah story is going to come, so we have to know why, right? And in a way, it kind of harkens us back to the genealogy with Cain before that, where we have Cain, who's a Tubal Cain, who's bragging about how many people he kills and stuff like that, right? Okay. Anything else there?
When God finds favor with Noah and tells him to build the ark, does Noah already have his children?
Apparently, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, apparently. Or at least we're told of 3 of them, right? We're told of Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Yes.
I don't know whether that's all of the children that he had or not. Because remember, we have these long lineages and they only tell us the most important names. So I don't know. Okay. The other thing I wanted to strike me was about verse 5. He sees that the wickedness of man is great in the earth. Every intention of his thoughts was only evil continually. So you get these 3 consistent. It's just emphasizing for us that things had to get extraordinarily bad before God took this radical action, right? Even the bad stuff we see going on in Cain's lineage in chapter 4 wasn't enough for God to take this radical action of returning the world to the chaos from which he brought it in the first place, right? let's pick up at verse 9, where you get into the Noah story proper. These are the generations of Noah. Now remember, that's a phrase that has introduced a couple of sections of Genesis to us now. The generations of Seth, the generations of Cain, the generations of the generations of the earth is chapter 2, verse 4, right? These are the generations of the earth. So it's a way of indicating the beginning of a story. It's almost like once upon a time. Lets us know we're starting a new segment of the story. And it's a story that gives us important background, again, to that mytho-historical character, these stories. That's something we're supposed to understand is underlying all of our other stories. This is the background to all of our other stories, okay? So these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a righteous man, blameless in his generation. Noah walked with God. And Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. So there we have that, your question about was Noah righteous? The last time we've seen the phrase walked with God is in reference to Enoch. Okay, so, yeah. So it's deliberately hearkening us back to that reference. Verse 11. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their way on earth. And Noah said to God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and out with pitch. This is how you are to make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits, its breadth, 50 cubits, and its height, 30 cubits. Make a roof for the ark, and finish it to a cubit above, and set the door of the ark in its side. Make it with lower, second, and third decks. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth to destroy all flesh, in which is the breath of life under heaven. Everything that is on the earth shall die, but I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, of every creeping thing of the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort shall come into you to keep them alive. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten, and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. So we've covered quite a lot of ground there. So let's go back to the first couple of verses there before we get into the instructions about the ark itself. And see what grabs your attention in those first, say 4 or 5 verses, verse 9 through 13.
Therefore the earth had quite a few people on it.
Yes, right. Yes, absolutely.
They were all corrupt.
Apparently.
Yes, I mean the corruption. Now, corruption is an interesting thought, right? Or interesting idea. We're going to see it used later in Scripture. Throughout, corruption is often used to describe idolatry. Okay, so this same word in the Hebrew is used to describe it. St. Paul will pick it up again in Romans to talk about our flesh. All flesh is corruptible. So it's essentially meaning rotten. Something that was intended good or starts good and decays and falls apart. So this language that is used here is pretty significant. So it's the Hebrew word nifal, corrupt. What else?
God's putting a big responsibility on Noah.
Absolutely.
it says, I am surely going to destroy both them and the earth.
Yes.
But he doesn't destroy the earth.
Well, I'm glad you're picking this up. There is actually, he also doesn't destroy all flesh. He puts it all in a boat and saves it.
Right.
Really important to remember this. This is the way the stories are told, right? We sort of want our stories to be told with like scientific precision because of when we live in history. This is metaphorical language in a sense. So all flesh is going to be destroyed, but I'm going to save two of everything so I can reboot everything, right? He's not actually destroying all flesh any more than the armies of Joshua are going to destroy all of the peoples. That language of destroying all the peoples does not mean put everyone to death. It means make it so these people as a people don't function anymore. So in a not good way, what happened to a lot of the Native American nations when Europeans came to this shore. There was no such thing as there were not Native Americans till we invented that term a couple of years ago, right? Because they were different nations. The Iroquois had nothing to do with the Sioux. They didn't think of themselves as the same people. In fact, they often warred amongst each other, had slaves of each other, and displaced each other from the land.
Yes.
They didn't think of themselves as a people. So they were in these different war things, but they didn't destroy every person in that. When they took over an area, this or that tribe got wiped out. What that meant was they no longer functioned as a people you could identify. They were largely intermarried into the conquering tribe, and they became part of that people's. So, again, why are genealogies so important to Jewish people? Because they tell you who you are, and they help you remember in the midst of diaspora. Remember, at the time of Jesus, 2/3 of the world's Jews are not living in the Holy Land. They're scattered everywhere in all these different cultures. How do they remember who they are? By reciting these genealogies. This is what makes me a Jew, right? Actually, the bare minimum requirement for being a Jew is if you're male, circumcision, and then participating in the Passover meal once a year. In the early canons of the church, the bare minimum requirement for being a Christian was baptism, which equates to circumcision, and coming to Easter service, which is literally the same word in Greek as Passover. Our candle, the big candle we light on special days, is called the Paschal candle. Pascha is the word for Easter and Passover. So we light it on the special days and we remember who we are. And the same way the Passover was the seminal event to define the Jewish people. And sometime we should take a little break and talk about it, or we could do the whole book of Exodus down the road. We could do it after Genesis, but we're a long way from that. If you want to take a break, I'm teaching Genesis with the kids. I'm going to talk about the 10 plagues. The 10th plague is different than the other 9. There's a reason why. There's a really significant reason why. And it's because it defines who the people will be. An Egyptian, being Jewish was not an ethnicity thing. On the night of the Passover, if you were Egyptian and put the blood on the walls and stuff like this, you became Jewish. And you left with the Hebrew people the next day as they went to worship God in the wilderness.
Didn't the 10th plague was something the emperor actually...
In a sense, yeah. He sets the rules for it because... his father actually sets the rules by feeding the children, by killing the firstborn thing. And God says earlier, in fact, it said in Genesis, we just saw it, right? The firstborn will be consecrated to me, the firstborn of every... This makes what Cain did so despicable. He was already the blessed one of the Lord because he was the firstborn. He throws that away out of envy for his brother.
But Cain didn't throw it away. God preferred his brother over him.
No, God just preferred his sacrifice. Cain did a bad sacrifice. He didn't give his best fruits to God. And God says to him, if you do well, will you not be accepted?
I think you missed that session.
You might have, yeah. That might have been one of the ones you were gone.
Yeah.
Cain doesn't. God doesn't accept Abel and reject Cain. He accepts Abel's sacrifice.
Better than...
and he says he has no it says he has no regard for Cain's sacrifice. So when Cain, obviously it says his face is downcast, God says, why are you pouting? If you do the right thing, you'll be accepted. So it's not a rejection of Cain as Cain himself. It is a rejection of his behavior. We do that to our kids all the time, right? I love you, but the way you're behaving, you're in trouble.
Yeah, sounds familiar.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, but Cain has the blessing of being the firstborn, and he throws that away by murdering his brother.
Okay.
So yeah.
What exactly does it mean to be the firstborn and consecrated to God?
Yes. It means that essentially, lack of a better word, God has a special claim on your life.
Okay.
And you have special responsibilities
Okay.
because of that. So, it would, obviously most of us know that typically throughout history, inheritance goes to the firstborn, right?
Firstborn male.
Yes. Although there's some women thrown in the mix, right? I mean, especially in the period of the judges, there's some.
Yeah.
Deborah was no one to mess with.
Mm.
Yeah, you have you typically the firstborn male, but then their responsibility was to provide for the whole rest of the family.
Mhm.
So it was what you would call a mixed blessing. Yes, they had everything, quote unquote, but then they had to provide for all the brothers and sisters and their children by extension till they died. So it was a huge amount of responsibility that came with it.
My father was the only boy out of 7 children.
Okay.
So he had 3 older sisters and 3 younger sisters.
Okay.
But whenever there was a need to take care of the mother, the sisters would always say, well, you're the son.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
So my dad's the one that had to step up.
Yeah, it was very much a kind of cultural.
And that's not
expectation.
It's still in the 20th century.
Oh yeah, yeah. Things have radically changed only in the most recent period of time, really post World War II. If you were raised before World War II, you had that older set of things. Rosie Riveter changed everything, right? The picture changed everything, the expectations for what women could do in culture. And then think about it. You get home from World War II with Rosie the Riveter, and the 60s is 12 years later. It's really not that much. It changes really pretty fast. So, and a lot of that, there's a scholar out right now. Well, not scholar, she's just a woman writing from her perspective, but has done scholarly work. Harrington's her last name. I'm not remembering her first name. Talking about how a lot of the changes we're dealing with are just a delayed reaction to the Industrial Revolution, right? Because the Industrial Revolution changed everything about the way families function.
Yes.
And that's about 100 the way I learned it, 130, 140 years ago at this point. But we have this legal system that's like only now starting to catch up with the way that life changed for regular families. That a lot of the objections that women had in the 60s, right? 60s was the feminine mystique. Who was that? Who wrote that? I should know her name and I can't remember it. Anyway, basically saying that men had more privileges than women. That had to do with because the fact that men were going out of the house. Well, up until the Industrial Revolution, the house was the place everyone worked, not just the women. Men worked in the house too. They were, or at least worked on the farmstead, worked in the household. The house provided, was the center of wealth creation. Now we're the center of wealth consumption. Wealth is created elsewhere. So women had tons more authority in the older system where it was everything happening in the home because the woman was in control of the home. So she had a tremendous amount of authority, even if she didn't have a lot of legal authority out there. But out there is not where most of the action was happening. Most of the action was happening here. So I first became acquainted with this as a way of thinking about history about 20 years ago. But this woman Harrington is kind of mainstreaming it now. Stuff that I was reading a long time ago because I'm just subscribed to some weird journals. So there were people saying this stuff for a while, but it's starting to get out into the mainstream now. So, okay. So back to Noah here. This language that God uses, I don't know if this caught you at all, but this language of flesh being corrupted. Again, that's exactly the language that St. Paul will use in the New Testament, particularly in Galatians. in 1 Corinthians, he'll use this as well, that all flesh is corruptible, right? So intended for good, that's the first the first two chapters of Genesis. Created good, God blessed it, said it was good, right? Now it's become corrupt. It's decayed. It's become something it wasn't supposed to be. And flesh means this, right? This is our stuff. Not just our body. It's not just that humanity became corrupt. All flesh has become corrupt. So the malady that starts with Adam and Eve's sin spreads through the rest of the animals, for which they are responsible. They are the priests. They are responsible for the welfare of the creation. And now it has spread out to them. So all flesh, to your point, has become corrupt as violence. You know, the birds that I love to listen to them sing fight like monsters at the bird feeder. Yeah. I have no problem once I started watching the birds at the bird feeder, believing they were once dinosaurs. I have no, that's what they tell us, right? That one side of the dinosaur family became birds, right? That doesn't shock me at all. But God doesn't actually destroy all of them. And so that's this hyperbolic language is maybe a better word than metaphorical. It's hyperbolic. I'm going to destroy all flesh, but I'm really not. God, even when God's bringing judgment, there's this preservation of a certain segment, right? This is what's going to happen over and over again. In fact, in the period of the prophets, there's a phrase for it. It's called remnant theology. Okay? So God's going to bring judgment against the people, but there's always a remnant he's going to preserve. Okay? So that remnant looks like, well, there's a famous story where Elijah, right, he's run away from Jezebel. Only unfaithful God, kill me. God's like, you're not the only one who's faithful. There's 7,000 people who are faithful. Stop feeling so sorry for yourself, basically, right? So God's going to preserve a remnant. This is the first time we really see God doing that. Whenever God brings judgment, he's going to preserve a remnant.
And wouldn't that be like hyperbole to make a point?
Yes.
For us, like with my kids, I'll say the extreme, but then they'll call me out for it.
Yeah, sure. It's exactly what it is. Yeah, you're right, exactly. Yeah, I'm going to kill you if you do that. I'm not really going to kill them. Yeah, exactly. And that's what hyperbolic language typically does. Again, we want a precise story that gives us measurements and weights, but that's not the way anyone tells stories, right? And this is how God has communicated with us, through story, not through precise weights and measurements. Okay. What else?
I was thinking, in light of like speaking about families, how you covered that. Like maybe that's what made Noah right, just because he focused in on the fact that his family was together.
That could be, yeah. Oh, and it says he's walking with God, and that's,
And he brought that family, not like just random people, but his whole unit.
Yes.
To preserve the family unit, where that broke down.
Right.
Because they go into other daughters, the way it was written from the beginning. I wasn't here last time.
No, I think you're definitely on the right track there. Again, in most cultures are what they call patrilineal, where they trace your genealogy through the men's side. There are some matrilineal ones. But or patriarchal, where the father of the family has that responsibility we were just talking about, right? You're the son kind of thing. Well, with that comes that you can bless your family too, because you have all that responsibility. So Noah's walking with God becomes a blessing to his children. And that's a significant thing for us to remember, because we tend to function in individualist mode as modern people. But having the sense that you can be a real blessing to the people around you as well as a real curse is significant there. Yeah, I think you're right about that. Anybody know what a cubit is, just out of?
I'm sorry?
A cubit. We're going to get into all the measurements of the ark here in a minute. So a cubit is, if you put your hand up like this, it's the length from your elbow to the tip of your longest finger.
Your exacting measurements.
Precisely.
Yours
That's
compared to mine. And
yeah, exactly. This is why they eventually standardized all these things. So the instructions on how big to make the ark wouldn't have worked for anybody but Noah,
Right.
because you need a cubit that's the same length as Noah's. So
So how do we know it's 450 feet?
that's a guess.
We
You know, I mean, it's
we measured Noah's Ark.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly right. It's close, right? I mean, my arm is different than yours, but not hugely different
Right.
from yours. So we can get in the right range, but it's not precise, right? This language, I was first introduced to the whole gopher wood thing through the camp song. You ever sing that? You remember the camp song? The Lord told Noah to build him an arky, arky. No, we use it to wake up people at camp when we want to prank a cabin. You stand outside their camp and you stand outside their cabin because the refrain is rise and shine and give God the glory, glory. So we'll stand outside and we'll wake up early and go to another, cabin or tent and shout at them till they're awake. But anyway, this is where I got introduced to the gopher wood idea. That's actually not a variety of wood.
Yeah, apparently, because they've been searching for the ark, and they've been trying to say that, well, this is the wood of the ark, and yet there is no gopher wood around or anything that no one knows of.
Exactly, yeah. So this is probably a reference to the fact that the wood had lots of wormholes. It looked like a gopher. So you have to look for the kind of wood that gets invaded by species like that. Some people suggest it might be cypress, but a resinous wood, a light wood.
My Bible says cypress.
There you go. So yeah, it's a variety that we could identify today. So it's just I find that's an interesting little factoid about it. And this is, of course, the first place we see the word ark as well. An ark is essentially a container for a precious thing. So Moses' basket is going to be described as an ark.
Ark of the Covenant.
Right. There's the Ark of the Covenant, in which we carry the Ten Commandments and Aaron's staff, right, and the manna. It's a receptacle to preserve something precious through difficult situations. Okay. This ark happens to be a boat. Moses' ark will be a basket. The Ark of the Covenant will be a container, carried around with sticks. So yeah.
I spent my whole life in engineering.
Uh-huh.
And when I think of Noah and his three sons building a 450-foot long ship, it's just amazing to me.
Yeah. This is why they needed. This is why Noah didn't die till was 585.
Yes.
Yeah, they had quite a few years to do this, and they were able-bodied through those years.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Actually, there was a fun movie a couple of years ago. Was that Evan Almighty?
Mhm.
Was it where he gets a message from God like this to build an ark, and he's just an average guy working at a power plant or something like this, and it's kind of fun. You see him building an ark in his yard. He's taking all these things and stuff. I thought it was a really good movie, and it caught a lot of the essences of the original Noah story, which was great. So, and may have even caught something we're going to talk about more as we move on. Anything else here?
It's amazing to me, at least according to the movie, the animals just come up by themselves.
Sure. Yeah, that's the way we sort of picture it. Because how else do you get all the creeping things of the earth, right? I mean, I'm not going to find a male and a female centipede or whatever. They gotta kind of come on their own. So there has to be some sort of providential action going on here on God's part.
I saw a television program, and it was downgrading this. It was saying that this can't be true.
Sure.
He said, can you imagine Noah having to go out and get two of every animals from all around the world? And I said, God did it. Noah didn't do it.
Mm-hmm. But to that point, here's just some things to think about. I don't have a firm position on this myself, but knowing how many species we have on the earth, even with 3 decks, and we know the size of the boat, there's no way they're going to fit, right? I mean, are you gonna have 2 of all these animals in there? So it seems to me that this is a story told about a locale. And that's, again, to the hyperbolic language, not when we say the whole earth, it's the earth they were aware of. but not the whole of our planet, because they weren't even aware of the rest of the planet at this point. That's just my estimation.
So are you saying the flood only occurred in a certain area?
Yes, that's what I believe. I'm not saying that definitively because I'm not putting it out. But even if I think about things, I've seen some of the theories. I've watched these things where, like, what happened to all the quantity of water? Like, think about the volume of water it would take to raise all the sea levels 1 inch.
13, you're going to raise it 13 foot above the highest mountain. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So think about how much water that would represent. And where is that water now?
There aren't enough zeros for that.
Exactly. So this is why I happen to think it was more about a certain locale, because we do have a flood story in all of the ancient religions. They all have a flood story. It's not just a few. Well, this would make sense if there was some what's the word I'm looking for here? Not archaeological, but some ancient experience humanity has of a flood in the world as they know it. And then humanity spreads out to cover the globe, but they're carrying that story with them as they spread. That makes more sense to me than trying to think about the physics of how I would cover the whole earth with a flood. And what's interesting, they have also discovered that at some point the Black Sea had a massive, what we would think of as a dam collapse that lowered the level of the Black Sea a tremendous amount. All that water flooding out at one time would do something like basically take out the plain of Shinar, which we're going to get to when we get to Abraham here, right? Or what we think of as the Fertile Crescent, but up there on that map there between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It could all flow downhill from those mountains and flood out an area. Now, we're not told that that's where this is. So I'm not saying that that's where it happened, but it makes more sense to me in this way. How would you have unless just God miraculously makes the water and then makes it disappear, which he can do. So like I said, I'm not holding that as a firm line in the sand, but when we know that most of humanity spread out from a locale, if you had a flood in that area that pretty much wiped out everybody, and then people spread out carrying the story, it would make sense that every culture would have that story out there, especially the ones we know the best are the ones that come from the area immediately around the Israelites. Whether it be the Sumerian epics like the Enuma Elish and things like this, or the Egyptian epics, I forget what the name of the Egyptian one is, but they've all got this flood story. Well, they're all coming from one area and going out. And so that's what makes sense to me. I'm not putting that out there as a definitive, like, everyone should believe that thing. That's what makes the most sense to me, of putting history together with these stories and knowing that both are true, they're accurate. So that's just my sense of things. And a boat this size might be able to manage all the animals that are they're familiar with from the plain of Shinar, right? Even the predators. You know, that you'd be able to stock up enough food, because they're going to be at sea for 7 months. We say 40 days and 40 nights, but it's a lot longer than that till they hit land. So they're out there for a while. There's a science fiction writer who's got himself in a lot of hot water of late. He was sort of the darling of the science fiction community back in the 80s and 90s, but he's a very, very devout Mormon and has put himself at variance with a lot of the powers that be because he holds on to some things. He wrote a whole story where he's imagining the original Noah and his ark, that this story comes out of it in the actual history. So it was an interesting thing, you know. But he kind of takes the same line I'm taking on it, that it was in a certain locale and the story was, you know, the family builds the boat and all these things. So. Okay, anything else about this? One more thing before we go to worship. This is the first time we're going to see a really important word in Scripture. Covenant. That is the foundation of all Jewish theology, and even our new theology, right? Even in the new covenant. Because what do I say every time I elevate the communion elements? This is my blood of the new covenant. Right? This is the first time we see that word appear. God making an agreement with a chosen person. And we see that, right? God chooses Noah. Noah walks with God, so it's not without merit, but God still chooses Noah. And now he's going to make a covenant with who? I shall establish my covenant with you, and you shall come into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you, and every living thing of all flesh. So this is a covenant God's making with Noah first, his family by extension, and then the animals that he's protecting by extension as well. This is Noah acting as priest over the creation, just like Adam and Eve were given. That was their original thing that they gave up on in the chapter 3. This is a rebooting of that. God's making creation in miniature is held within the ark, right? And God's going to reform the world based on this sort of germinal seed that He saved. And that's the covenant He's making with them. This covenant's covenants always involve two things. It always involves what one person does and what someone else does. Okay. When we get to chapter 15 of Genesis, we're going to talk about a suzerain vassal covenant. But until we get to there, we're just going to talk about covenant for now. God is going to be making this covenant with Noah. God's side of the covenant is going to be to do what?
Sorry.
When he's making a covenant with them. So there's two sides to a covenant. There's what you do and what I do if we make a covenant. So what's Noah's side of the covenant going to be?
Taking care of the animals.
Build the ark, right? God's going to even bring the animals, but Noah's got to build the ark. God's side of the covenant is going to be preserve them through the judgment that is coming. And in the end, as we're going to see when the story wraps up, to replant the earth with the animals and the humans that He saved on this ark, and then to put His bow in the sky to remind us that He won't do it again. Okay. All right. That's where we will end it for today, unless you have any other questions about this. We'll start right on chapter 7 next week. And I was just looking, this is long distance, but I'm looking ahead. We probably won't have class during Holy Week.